Now, as we mentioned a moment ago, the US and the UK say they are investigating allegations that Russia may have used chemical weapons in Mariupol. Ukrainians have said that an unknown airborne substance has caused people to suffer from breathing problems. No evidence has been put forward, and Russia has denied the accusations. But Ukraine's president says pro-Russian commanders in Donbass have threatened to use chemical weapons.
One of the Russian occupier speakers, referring to the statements of Donetsk People's Republic militia spokesman, Edward Basirin, said that they might use chemical weapons against defenders of Mariupol. We consider it very seriously. I'd like to remind the world leaders that Russia's possible use of chemical weapons has been already discussed. At that moment, it meant that the reaction to the Russian aggression had to be much more severe and faster.
Volodymyr Zelensky, and our Rice correspondent Philip Crowther is in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, and he joins us now live. Good to see you, Philip. So reports suggesting this war may have taken an alarming and rather sinister turn. What do we know about the possible use of chemical weapons in Mariupol?
Looking at precisely the possibility thereof, because this is the kind of thing that is almost impossible to verify independently. Mariupol is a besieged city, meaning that there are no journalists able to get into that area where that one Ukrainian unit says that chemical weapons might have been used. So what we're looking at here is essentially a statement that we have from almost 24 hours ago from the Azov regiment. It is one of the units that is fighting as part of the Ukrainian armed forces in the port city of Mariupol. It says that a drone had dropped what this regiment says was a poisonous substance on them. Subsequently, they also published a video where they themselves interviewed those who they said were the victims of what could be a chemical substance. But again, that is right now the only source there is for that. The Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister says that they are investigating whether indeed a phosphorus munition was used. Now, phosphorus is not a chemical weapon, but it would still be a significant escalation. Now, what we've heard from a lot of Western governments is that if there was to be the use of chemical weapons, then this would be a serious escalation. But we're not quite there yet. Why? Because we simply don't know whether a chemical weapon was used in Ukraine over the last 24 hours. And it's going to be very, very difficult to verify that independently.
And Philip, I wonder if there's been any official reaction from Russia to these unconfirmed reports of the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. I mean, there seems to be the suspicion that there'll be an expected denial and the pointing of the finger of blame back to the accuser.
Yeah, and this is what tends to happen when Russia is accused of something like this in warfare. We know that from the Syrian conflict as well. Russia, of course, has denied the use of chemical weapons, which it also had done repeatedly in Syria. So you're going to see this again and again, and indeed Russia has thrown accusations right back at Ukraine, that kind of thing. So I don't think you could expect anything else from the Russian side right now, but always take this into account that we only have this one source saying this, and that it is absolutely fair for the Russian side to deny this while we still don't have any kind of verification on this.
And Philip, the mayor of Mariupol has been giving some rather grim news. Up to 10,000 civilians or residents dead, according to him.
Yes, and even up to 20,000 possibly. He says that in fact there are bodies in the streets of Mariupol, and the images, of course, that that brings to us are similar to what was discovered in Bucha and other outskirts of the capital city Kiev once the Russian forces had departed there. Those signs of what many Western governments and indeed the Ukrainian government allege are war crimes on behalf of the Russian armed forces while they were retreating from the outskirts of Kiev. Now, for us to be able to verify those claims from the mayor of Mariupol, one would have to get access to the city, and according to what we're seeing right now, well, the Russians have control over a larger part of the city than the Ukrainian armed forces do. In fact, a lot more, including all of the surrounding area. We can't say yet whether this is the last stand for those Ukrainian armed forces who are there, but it looks a little bit like it. And if Russian forces do take control over the city, then you won't have a similar situation to the one that you saw in Bucha, where the press and the Ukrainian army and independent investigators get to go to those areas and actually take a close look and investigate forensically what actually happened right there. That possibility might not even exist in Mariupol. The mayor of the city, by the way, also saying that there was mobile cremation equipment being used in Mariupol by Russian forces to hide some of the proof of civilian dead bodies. Again, something that cannot independently be verified, but a shocking statement to hear from the mayor of a city that has been besieged from almost the very start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Meanwhile, of course, Philip, officials in eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region, Luhansk, saying that Russian tanks have begun advancing for that expected renewed offensive. I mean, what can you tell us about what's happening in the east as both Russia and Ukraine build up their forces there?
Well, there are moves by Russian forces from inside of Russia in the east right there, but also from inside of that Donbass region, because Russian forces are already present, of course. If you look at a map of the areas that Russia currently controls, it includes the parts of the Donbass and Luhansk regions that had been under control by Russian-backed separatists and still are, of course, now in conjunction with the Russian army, essentially. But the Russian armed forces also managed to take control of parts of northern Donbass around the city of Kharkiv. That's the country's second largest city, in the south as well, around the city of Mariupol that we already mentioned, and they are now moving from those areas in all directions toward the center of that Donbass region. That's where we find cities like Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, cities from which the local mayors and the governors have called on the civilians to leave as quickly as possible. There was a call again today for people to evacuate, and that possibility does still exist, by the way, even out of the city of Mariupol. Even despite the fact that it is besieged, there is still a humanitarian corridor agreed upon by Russia and Ukraine that should allow hundreds of civilians to get out of that city still, and the same should be happening in other parts of eastern Ukraine right now. There are evacuation buses, there are evacuation trains, and there is that recommendation, that plea even from local authorities that people should get out of there as quickly as possible.
Always good to talk with you, Philip. Thank you very much indeed. Philip Crowther, Arise correspondent, talking to me there from the western Ukrainian city of Lviv.